Welcome to the London Free Press Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Gilbert. A woman charged in the fatal crash that killed an 8-year-old girl who was out for a walk with her brownie troop is facing new lawsuits. So today I'm talking with London Free Press reporter Jennifer Bieman about the lawsuit she already faced and what these new ones are all about. Hi, Jen. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Thanks for having me.
We love having you around here. Can you detail for us the crash that happened? If you don't recall, this one was in November 2021 on Riverside, just west of Wonderland. Can you just detail what happened in this crash?
It was in November 30th, and it was, in 2021, and it was, kind of pandemic winter and, difficult time coming through a couple years of that. And this was a really
Mhm.
particularly upsetting crash. Injured 10 people, including one child fatally, an 8-year-old Alexandra, and injured a lot of children as well, a teen and an adult, some of them quite seriously. A lot of them did spend time in hospital. Basically, what police had said at the time had happened was a vehicle had gone through the intersection at Wonderland Road on Riverside Drive, and then kind of hit a barrier, and then hit a light standard, and the pole fell over, and a brownies troop was walking down the sidewalk at the time. They met at a nearby church weekly, so that was kind of the anatomy of the crash at the time. There
Mhm.
were criminal charges laid, but I just remember it being a really difficult time for like Londoners, and there was a
Mhm.
big outpouring of community support for the brownies and the Girl Guides troop. I guess they're called Embers now, but
Yes.
lighting blue candles, hanging up, like Girl Guides outfits at homes and things. Like Londoners really felt this crash quite deeply.
Mhm. What was the woman who's charged is Petronella McNorgan. She's 77 now, I believe. But what was she initially charged with?
I think it was dangerous operation of a motor vehicle,
Right.
but there were other charges as well that were laid.
Right.
Her criminal trial is, coming up in a couple months in March, and there's a pretrial hearing at the end of the month. So they're sort of moving towards that trial on the charges she faced in connection to the crash.
Right. Two new lawsuits have just recently been filed against her. In addition to a lawsuit by six of the families back in August 2022. Can you talk about what these two new lawsuits are about? Why are there two of them? Why didn't the families band together in this one?
Yeah, so I mean, when there's a wrong that's happened, there's sort of a criminal law path that charges that the crown lays and are pursued in criminal court, and then there's also this other side, which is sort of civil lawsuits and things that are meant to kind of maybe compensate or that sort of work. So that's sort of what
Mhm.
these are. There were six that were filed. They were all represented by learners lawyers in August of 2022. And then these ones came in after. So we don't really know why exactly the reason was there, but it's possible these families didn't want to participate in that sort of group, or these ones were just filed. They didn't know if they wanted to do anything and then decided to. So that's what these are. There was one filed in December and one filed just a couple days ago in January in London court. So both are children who were alleged to have been injured in the crash, and they're seeking about $5.9 million combined in damages against the drive,
Okay.
Petronella.
Do we know how the little girls named in or who are part of this lawsuit are doing now? They're Autumn Hatton Gautier and Cara Grace Louise Ton. How are they doing now? Do you know what kinds of injuries or disabilities they claim to have?
In the statement of claim, it alleges a lot about kind of what happened, how they were injured, and sort of what the injuries were. So these are allegations that aren't tested in court. These are just what they're saying and putting forth to say, hey, this is our case. But from the statements of claim, we can kind of tell that a lot of them had like persistent anxiety or chronic pain or other things that have kind of alleged to have come from this crash. So these are not just sort of the allegations they're making is that these injuries were not, kind of one time things that healed up in a couple weeks. They're things that have had a lasting impact on these children's lives, which is what they're alleging. And, they're hoping to, prove that in court. And that's sort of what's the basis of these lawsuits.
Sure. I find it interesting, and maybe you can, provide some insight on how common this is, that the children are the ones. There's a few lawsuits here, but the children have actually filed a lawsuit each against this woman, and then their families have also filed their own lawsuits against this woman. How common is it that a child could file or does file a lawsuit?
So it is two lawsuits, and the children are the plaintiffs in each. So they're children. They can't just sue by themselves. They're probably about 9 years old by now. So
Sure.
they have what's called a litigation guardian that comes in, says, hi, I'll be your litigation guardian. A lot of times it's a parent if the parent isn't in conflict, and so that's what we've got here. We've got a child and a litigation guardian in both cases.
Mhm.
In one of the lawsuits, we do have family members that are actually claiming under the Family Law Act for damages. So they're alleging that they themselves, as family of the allegedly injured child, have had certain out of pocket expenses and other sorts of things that have come up, and so they've got kind of, it's a smaller amount, but they're also claiming for that in one of the lawsuits too.
Mhm. Mhm. Talk about the lawsuits that were filed back in August. Six families are suing the driver. That's for a combined 15 million. What kinds of things are they suing for?
It does seem to be a lot of the similar kinds of things. You're
Okay.
testing my memory here. I do think it was sort of, and
Sorry.
no, it was. I think a few of them were negligence or alleged
Sure.
negligence claims on the part of the driver, but also it was mostly kind of personal injury stuff. So basically, just that
Mhm.
these children were allegedly injured in this act, and they've sustained not just damage from the injuries, but longer term things is what the statements of
Yeah.
claim there alleged. These things do move slowly though, so I don't think we've really seen much um, result there. And it's possible that with civil claims that they'll wait to see what happens at the criminal trial before really kind of pursuing this in earnest. And whether that's towards a trial for these lawsuits, all
Mhm.
8 of them, or whether it's towards some sort of settlement. We don't know, but we'll have to stay tuned.
Okay. It was also interesting to me that in those in the lawsuit filed last August, it alleges that Petronella's husband, Gerald, the co-owner of the vehicle, was negligent for allowing his wife to drive because he should have known that she was an incompetent driver. It's interesting that he would be named in that and be maybe responsible for her driving habits. Is that uncommon, or do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but
Mhm.
certainly he's named in these lawsuits because he's listed as the alleged owner of the vehicle. So
Okay.
Petronella McNorgan is alleged to have been the driver, and Gerald McNorgan is alleged to have been the owner of the vehicle.
Sure.
And their insurer is also named in these lawsuits, at least one of them. So that's kind of the why there.
Okay, okay. What does the defense lawyer say? Who is the McNorgan's defense lawyer, and what have they said?
So Morgan's defense lawyer in the criminal matter is Phil Millard, the London lawyer here. I spoke to him briefly on the weekend, and they're gearing up, obviously, for the criminal trial coming up this spring. And he said, they deny wrongdoing. He is expecting to put forth a defense, obviously, to the criminal charges, and just sort of denied wrongdoing in the crash. And certainly we'll see with these lawsuits, when a statement of defense is delivered, which is sort of a requirement in civil procedure for these things, there's a time limit for sort of those. We'll see what sort of issues they raise and sort of defenses they give.
So so what are the next steps? I guess we'll start the criminal trial in the spring, and then has anyone heard these lawsuits so far? They'll have to go to some kind of court. What happens with the lawsuits? Will we wait until after the criminal trial as you suggested?
So for the two new ones, statements of defense will be filed. That's just
Okay.
what happens with these things. There's a time limit on those. So McNorgan's lawyers will say, hey, we disagree. Here's what we disagree with, and here's what we contend. Again, all allegations at this point. These things do move quite slowly, though. So it's we'll get sort of those, and then maybe the criminal trial kind of happens, and then there's sort of these things can last years. Civil
Mhm.
litigation can. There's cases that sort of kind of putter along. So don't expect any sort of resolution super quickly, is what I would say, just given past experience watching these things work their way through the courts.
Absolutely. Well, we're certainly going to be watching your reporting on this because we know that you or someone at the Free Press will be reporting on the criminal trial when it comes up in the spring. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.